No, I'm not a writer.
Okay.
All right, and we are finally back. I think it's episode 17 now. Kind of losing track because we did interim one there with Skrailing in between, which should be coming out at the same time as this episode. So make sure you check that out. But today we've got, of course, Spectre, who managed to grace us from class today. Probably statistics or something weird. And then we've got Whiskey, your Whiskey, Peacekeeper. I'm never quite sure. Like, you're in our clan. And I still don't know what you actually go by.
So it's a long story. Basically, the gaming tag that I always use is Whiskey11, but in World of Warships, somebody had already taken it. So I went back to an older call sign, your Peacekeeper.
I'm just curious. Now you got me sidetracked already. That
was quick.
It doesn't take much these days. But did you reach out to the person who had your name and ask him for it back? I know some people do that. I didn't know if you were that kind of guy.
I ran into him once in a game, and I kind of just jokingly poked and prodded at him about it. And he said, well, if somebody would allow me to have my name back, I'd allow you to have yours back. And I'm like, well, I'm willing to pay the doubloon, so maybe we should convince these people to move along with their names. And I haven't seen him since. So he's from Australia, if I remember correctly. I don't know why he's playing on the North American server, but hey, maybe he's here stateside. I don't know.
I feel like there's a lot of Aussies here on the NA server.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that, actually.
Well,
I wonder if they just get better pings here on the NA server than on the Asian server.
I think it's a language thing.
That and part of it's population size, too. But yeah, the language is a good point.
True.
All right. So, I keep wanting to say ubiquitous today, but that doesn't apply here. So we're just going to move past that. But so you've got your own YouTube channel, and I was wondering if you just take a few moments to tell us about it, and really what your focus is and what you really try and stress that sets you apart from some of the other channels out there that are going on for ships.
Sure. So I'm the owner, I guess you could call that, of Whiskey's Gaming Lounge. And of course, Whiskey, me and my previous gaming tag is where that comes from. And I, right now, am focused quite heavily on doing how to play series videos for, like, right now I'm on German battleships. Bismarck was released Monday. And if I can get a decent game in there, Friedrich der Gross will be next Monday. But I also have some other videos on there in which I talk about, just yesterday, I had a video on statistics, and whether or not battleships are balanced. And I'm sure that subject will come up later, but there's just a mix mash of different videos out there. And what I try and do is I try and play it kind of from the perspective of the everyman. I'm not the world's greatest player, but I'm not the world's worst player either. And so I just kind of give tips and stuff from my perspective and try and throw in a little bit of history and just touch on all the high points.
So do you give lessons? Because I'll throw some doubloons if you can teach Spectre here how to battleship.
Well, I seem to remember Spectre from way back when he first had his Iowa. In fact, Woe9 and I were just talking about this the other day, and we both remember Woe had just gotten his Montana. Was in my Iowa, and Spectre had just gotten his North Carolina. So I've seen him play Battleship. I'm more worried about his carrier gameplay than anything.
And yet,
thanks for the vote of confidence.
Man, you really are getting hammered by your classes. No response at all. No swearing. I'm disappointed.
Yeah,
Wow.
The brain's a little frazzled at the moment from all the class material.
Good. That means you'll just do nothing but agree with me tonight then.
Hardly. I'll take classes on how to play how to play battleships if you take classes on how to play this game. Period.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, so we've been waiting for it for a long time, and it looked like there were a few recocks of the launch of British cruisers, and frankly, we could probably spend the whole evening talking about the release of the British line, but let's just get right into it then. So it came out. I'm only at tier 6 right now. Have you guys started on the line yet?
Yeah, I free XP up to 6, and I'm up to 7 right now. I haven't had tons of time to play, so progress is a little slow.
Yeah,
about-
I'm only to the tier 5. I'm on the Emerald at the moment, and I've only played, I think, one game in her.
Did you do it the hard way? So you started at tier 1? Did you do the Black Swan?
Oh, yeah. The only ship that I used any free XP to move past was Danae. I could not get through Danae without... I just got frustrated because at the time it was just... Everybody was like, hey, I'm going to take out my Imperator Nikolai and watch the salty tears of all the cruiser players. So I just kind of... Once I had played a couple games in her to get an idea of how she played, I free XP'd the rest of the way to Emerald.
Well, I'm kind of curious because we don't spend much time down there, let alone at tier 1. When was the last time you played a tier 1 derailing again there, Spectre?
A tier 1?
Yeah.
Oh boy. It was probably months ago, or back in May actually, when they were giving out the military contributor month flag. I think one of the requirements was to farm kills or something, and I was told that it was extremely easy to like kill steal at tier 1.
So not just farm kills, but kill steal. All right.
Yeah.
I guess that's a technique. But all right, so since you're the only one, Whiskey, that's played the tier 1 Black Swan, tell me how the AP worked on those soft ships down there.
Well, the thing with the AP is it's overpowered when they're broadside to you, and it's a little frustrating when they're not. And I happened to catch a couple games that were almost entirely Black Swans, so it seemed okay. I mean, if somebody was bow on to you, it was a little difficult to do damage, but it wasn't completely impossible either. You just found a different target, and the rate of fire was insane. I mean, that thing is just it's like the Minotaur, but squared down to tier 1. You know, you watch the Minotaur play, and it's just this rate of fire monster, but it's AP only. It's weird. I think it's a fine ship. I think it fits fine in tier 1, although I feel sorry for the poor Erie. That was the one lone non-Black Swan ship in my first game, and she got destroyed so quickly.
Really? So like you didn't have... Well, you said they were mostly Black Swans. I might go back and try it. I'm really curious, one-on-one, nose on or something like that, how any ship firing HE fares against the Black Swan. My guess is that nose on, the Black Swan will get crushed every time. But with my limited time, we'll see if we make it down there. But so on that, let's get right into the AP. And this is probably, and we say this every time something comes out with a new flavor, a ship line that has a very specific flavor to it. And let's start with the AP only for the entire line.
Well,
it's pretty interesting. It's AP only, but it's on it's only like a 6-inch gun. That's 152s across the whole line.
Yep.
And evidently, I think Wargaming has said that it's got like a shorter fuse and it's got like more advantageous bounce angles. So overall, actually, what Whiskey said about tier 1 is actually largely still holds true for higher tiers too. It's if the target is showing you anything close to a broadside, you are just going to chunk them for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, salvos, off their health pool. But if they are nose onto you, you're just virtually completely useless.
Well, I mean, the exact quote from the notes are excellent ricochet angles and low fuse arming delay time, which will significantly decrease the number of ricochets and overpins.
I should also mention, I also feel like the calculation for overpins on these shells is also advantageous too. Normally it's 10%, but I'm pretty sure for the British shells, these British AP shells, it's much higher.
So
that I don't know about, but I would be curious to see that number too.
Which number? The actual overpin coefficient?
Yeah, how it's normally 10% or whatever it is. Now it's supposedly higher. If it is, I'd be curious to see what that number is.
I feel like it is.
Well, so with that, and it looks like there's quite the IO campaign or the information campaign to say, hey, when you're shooting a battleship, because we know it's going to suck and it's really going to be painful for you, shoot at the aft and fore superstructures, I think is what it said. And it sounds a little bit like an education or compensation thing and we'll refer to the troll corner here in a second about the forum feedback on just the AP part, because there's a lot to talk about with these cruisers, but I'm not sure how it's gonna work out for the average player, right? I think what I kind of take away from this line is it takes kind of finesse and it's got a high skill curve.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In fact, I think it even mentioned that in the notes itself for the release that this was going to be more of a line for the intermediate to high end player. And is that a mistake? I don't know. But in terms of shooting at superstructure, go find me a tier 3 or 4 battleship that has a lot of superstructure for you to shoot at. There's really not that much there. And then still, you're at that point where you've still got the all or nothing armor scheme hasn't really taken over because you're still in those World War I and pre-World War I dreadnoughts that get modified for World War II usage. So shooting at the superstructure that's non-existent is great and all, I guess, but I don't know how you do that at the low tiers. At the high tiers, I'm sure you're fine because you got all that juicy superstructure to shoot at.
Well, you're at the tier 7 now. You're at the Fiji, right, Spectre?
Yeah.
So have you noticed a significant impact in shooting superstructure versus your damage output with AP only?
Well, if the warship is broadside on, you can still do pretty good damage, but face on, like getting on salvos where you only deal 500 or 1,000 damage like a piece is not particularly unheard of. But actually, I find that generally speaking, aiming with British cruisers, it's if I don't know if you guys are familiar with aiming at German battleships, where you try to aim for sort of like the upper belt, but you just in a British cruiser, you just aim at every ship as though they were a German battleship. You just aim for like that upper belt and like superstructure, and just avoid the belt, like the actual like waterline armor belt at all costs, and you're largely a-okay if you just stick with that.
Yeah, I would say that plays really well with people who are used to playing the German cruisers because they have basically the same requirement for their AP usage because their HE is so lackluster.
Well, the other thing I noticed is that even with the small caliber guns, it looks like they've adjusted the suborbital arc to like somewhere in the lower atmosphere now.
It's still pretty bad at range.
Yeah, I mean over 15K or 14K, it sucks. But
if you were a U.S. destroyer captain for the longest time, you'll feel right at home shooting the guns on them because they have about the same lead and feel, at least from my experience with them.
Well, we'll talk about how to employ it here in a second. But the other key part here is that with the AP is the single launch torpedo tubes, which I think is one of the most troll features in the game outside of like the 20K torpedoes.
Oh, it's totally way more high risk than the wide launch or the narrow launch torpedoes are because you either hit with all of them or you hit with none of them, or you can make these spreads that you can't dodge. But I find myself launching them basically at one point and then you hit with all of them. In fact, the other day I was messing around in the Danae and I uppercutted a Nassau. It was pretty funny. I hit him with I think it's 6 torpedoes on that thing. It was pretty powerful salvo.
You uppercut him. So did he like drop his pants and then you punched him in the belly, or?
No, he was coming around the side of a mountain, but all I had on him was probably about a quartering profile where all you could see is his nose and maybe a little bit of his broadside. And just that, he just didn't get maneuvered in time to get out of the way of him because I think it was like 3K away.
I like being able to put all the torpedoes in one group. And I also like being able to use just one to finish off a ship and still have torpedoes in reserve, especially on the ships that are going to have multiple launchers per side, like 4x3s or something like that.
Yeah, shame we don't get that until tier 9. At least again, rather.
Yeah, that seems like if you look at the stats, the mid ones aren't nearly as torpedo intensive.
Starting at 6, you get real torpedoes, and it's a significant advantage the way they are. I would be curious to see you guys want to take bets on how long it takes before a certain destroyer line gets single launch torpedoes.
If you're talking about the Japanese destroyers, I don't see it happening. That would make them way too powerful.
I just mean any destroyer line.
I
Maybe
think it would be
maybe as early as the Germans. But I mean, they said that like the British cruisers getting these single launch torpedoes, like they're gonna sort of wait and see how people like them on the cruisers before rolling it out to other lines, right? So, I don't know. I really like them. I think if they make them incredibly powerful. Like as useless as you are shooting broadside on like or bow on battleships, if they get too close, like it's not out of the realm of possibilities for you to be able to sink every single one of your torpedoes into a battleship. And so that's sort of like almost like the ultimate deterrent for these cruisers. It's you pop smoke and you just play a game of chicken, see who chickens out first. And if the battleship takes too long, he's just gonna eat like a full broadside of torpedoes and he's gonna die.
Well, let's take a moment and go to the forum corner here, and give us a general read of the impressions of the average player out there for British cruisers.
If the amount of complaining on the forums and Reddit are to be believed, it appears that just the vast majority of people just are not clicking with the cruisers.
As in when from the perspective of playing the cruiser.
Yeah, from playing the cruiser, they just feel that the AP only thing makes them too weak. There's been a lot of complaints about how the British cruisers were sold as sort of like DD hunters, but with their low shell caliber, even an angled DD will sometimes bounce your shells. And so just between that and just being incredibly squishy, just dying to everything, like heavy cruisers, AP just chew right through you. A lot of people can't seem to make these things work.
Well, so, and you and I were talking about this the other day, I think, and I find it interesting that you see one extreme where everyone's like, I hate playing it, and then they get in a match and they're like, I hate playing against it because it's overpowered, right? And I think that just goes back to the entire finesse argument. It's in the hands of a really skilled player, it will punish you. And you and I were playing together the other day, and the smoke is somewhere between the Russia and the US kind of duration.
It's I think on average like 20 seconds shorter than the US, but it's still longer than the Japanese or Russian smokes.
Yeah, and so two destroyers together can literally, two destroyers, there I go, right? Two cruisers can literally sit and smoke constantly until they run out of smoke.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of truth to accidentally calling them destroyers because their play style seems to be pretty similar, more or less on the lines of like the ambush style of early tier Russian destroyers. But I definitely think that with the right finesse, like you said, that they're quite capable in the right hands. And if you play it outside of that role, it gets very difficult to play them well. They are definitely not long-range ships by any stretch of the imagination. Their strength, as contrary to popular belief as it may sound, at least in my experience, has been that kind of mid-range or up close and personal, but more ambush style, where you're jumping out behind an island to ambush a cruiser quick and take him out of the fight and then quickly ducking away.
Well, let me ask you this.
To build on what Whiskey just said, like, British cruisers benefit. You will, as a player, you will benefit greatly from having DD experience, and also from if you're really good at playing like the Atlanta or the Flint, you'll feel right at home with British cruisers. One of the things about like these shell arcs is, again, like their American cousins. You can park behind a lot of islands and just lob shells over the islands at your targets and such. And just in general, just these cruisers just simply not meant to be shot at. Like, you need to be sneaky, you need to be on people's flanks or whatever. You should really not be the front line, so to speak, because if you get shot at, the ship will fall apart beneath you.
Well,
it's huge.
So it's meant to be a support role, right? But at the same time, you got to.
If the enemy zooms in towards your team, like, you can't be in that sight picture because they're just gonna shoot at you over anything else. The British cruiser line, the entire line has basically sort of like become like the Pensacola's of whatever game they're in. Just as soon as anyone sees you, they load AP and they shoot at you because they know they'll cash in huge amounts of damage from attacking you.
That's pretty funny. The Pensacola of any game. I'm gonna have to work that into the title for sure. But
and it's bad too. the other day I was playing a game in my Hindenburg, and there was a Neptune on the enemy team, and it'll end up in one of my battle montages. But he came out broadside at about 6K from me, but I was ready for him because the spotting plane had spotted him, and one salvo did 4 citadels. He turned slightly, and another salvo with the rear turrets did another 4 citadels. And then by the time he had turned around, the front guns had loaded up, and he was dead with 2 more citadels. I mean, they're just really squishy when you don't have that element of surprise. And Spectre's right. You don't want to be the focus of any enemy fire because you just don't have the wherewithal to hang in there. The survivability is just not there.
Yeah, but so where does that fall, right? It's supposed to be a support cruiser, but yet you have to get close enough to be in a super dangerous area. And I think they tried to balance that with some of the tools they gave it. I mean, for instance, you've got a heal starting at what tier, Spectre? 3, 4?
Starting at tier 3.
Yeah,
heal.
So you've got a heal that starts then, which is unheard of for any other line. And you've got smoke, which is fairly decent. But if you mess that up, it's all over.
Pretty much. I mean, this is where the finesse from playing this line comes from that we were saying this whole time, right? Like you need to identify places where you can like go hunt DDs, but not get shot at by heavy cruisers and battleships.
Well, let's talk about the hunting DD thing. Do you think that the rate of fire and the all AP, even if a destroyer can bounce 1 or 2, like is it really effective against destroyers?
From my experience, it's definitely not everything that Wargaming is sort of chalk them up to be. Just the fact that DDs can bounce your shells alone is just kind of puzzling for a purported DD hunter. But if you catch a DD off guard, if they're not like perfectly bound to you, you still will chunk them pretty hard. I personally though still think like a ship with HE is probably better at hunting DD just because the HE, it kills modules, it knocks out engines, rudders, and weapon systems, and just with AP I just feel like I don't get that as often.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think with the way AP is so focused, you actually have to hit that module with it to actually do damage, and that's a little bit more difficult than using HE to take out modules with. But the interesting part about the destroyers being able to bounce your shells is they have to pick a direction either towards you or away from you. If they're going away from you, you've accomplished your objective if you're trying to push them off a cap. But if they're coming towards you, eventually they're going to have to turn, and you've got so many other utilities there to take advantage of. So it's kind of that dicey situation where it's like, well, do I go towards it or away from it? And if I'm already going towards it, well, now I got to turn away, and then you expose your broadside to them. Even in a destroyer, that can be punishing no matter what ship is shooting at you, let alone these cruisers with these super short fuse times that, do normal pens with 6-inch guns at point blank range to destroyers as opposed to over pens. But I think they're fine as destroyer hunters, but they definitely play a more opportunistic role within the fleet. They're not a ship that you can, be a YOLO commander and solo up into a cap and plan to take it by yourself in the midst of all of the enemy fleet. That's not going to work. But if you can play around with the fringes of their team, I think you can definitely do some work up against destroyers and other cruisers that aren't paying attention.
Well, I guess I'll have to see when we get to the higher tiers, but at least at the lower tiers, and kind of look at the tech tree. Let's talk about some of the survivability stuff. So they've got a heal, which, I think once you get to 8, I think at tier 8 it's going to be a huge deal. Below that it's nice, but it's not as big of a deal. So we'll see when we get to tier 8. But the being able to have smoke and hydro, and if you want to trade out the smoke for radar, which, given how soft it is, I think it's back to the defensive fire versus hydro dilemma where you want hydro, but you take defensive fire out of necessity. And I think smoke falls in that category, right? You have to take smoke as a British cruiser, so why give us the choice?
I mean,
yeah.
The smoke is nice and all, but I think it's more for like maybe division play where you could, you have division mates that you can maybe count on to bring smoke for you or something. I don't know. I think choice is always nice to have. I'd rather have the choice be there and be like a really poor choice, and most of the time a choice that I won't have to make, than have no choice at all.
Well, you meant radar, right? Because
Yeah, radar.
okay, because you said smoke. I was just curious. I was like, when have you ever chosen radar over smoke?
Yeah, I think the limitations there come from the way that the game is currently designed, where you can't change consumables once you've hit the battle button, and maybe that's something that Wargaming could look into changing, is being able to tweak your loadout based on what's actually in the game. And I think that would help cruisers out a lot in cruiser gameplay just in general. So maybe that's not a bad idea for them to consider.
Well,
It
in
would
this
be
case,
very nice.
in this case, it wouldn't matter, right? I mean, this is one of those clear choices. There's outside of maybe like some league play or like a division gimmick thing, you would never take the radar over the smoke.
Yeah, if you were in a division with some destroyers, I could see it having utility, because you'd be able to use the radar while you were all sitting in the smoke. Of course, how dangerous that is, but outside of that, if you're playing solo, or if you're playing in just the random matches during the day, I don't think it's a good idea.
Well, so do you guys think, putting two cruisers with that kind of spam in the same spot that can stay constantly smoke for probably about half the match, I think. Is that balanced?
I think it's fine.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with it, especially considering how easy it is to blind fire into the smoke and get hits. I just don't. If the smoke was like twice as wide as it currently is, and there's this big area for that ship to hide in, maybe. But with how easy it is to blind fire into the smoke, it's not really that overpowered.
Man, you guys must be way better at it than me, because I don't generally have great success blind firing in the smoke. How about you, Spectre?
I can't say I've had too many problems with it, but
I'm pretty spotty with the whole blind fire thing. But I mean, generally speaking, with the British cruisers, I mean, you because you go into the game with sort of like a DD hunter mindset, like you're pretty cognizant of where exactly the DDs are.
Do you?
Not to mention, this is a pretty good point to also bring up the fact that these ships have amazing maneuverability as well as acceleration and deceleration rates.
Yeah, don't
combine
they gain
that with
speed in a turn?
Yeah, or I think they said the Minotaur does, but in general, the cruisers in general don't lose as much speed in turn as the ships of other nations. But you combine the size of the smoke screen and the fact that you can, go forward and back up very quickly. It's actually very possible if you have your Hydra on and maybe Vigilance as a captain skill to see the torpedoes coming and get your ship in a position where you minimize the torpedoes. If you don't just avoid them outright.
They do accelerate very quickly and handle very well, which is there's one other piece, which is they're extremely concealable. Looking at the tier 10 one, it looks like it's going to be, kind of like Russian DD type concealable.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, there was somebody saying that you could actually do a full concealment build and stealth fire torpedoes, like in a 8/10 of a kilometer detection range radius there.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the math on the Minotaur, it looks like it's going to be down somewhere around 9-ish, and with 10K torpedoes, I mean, you're looking at a giant destroyer, right?
Yeah, and they're 8 pretty powerful and pretty fast and hard to spot torpedoes. So, 1.3 kilometer for the detection range on them torps is pretty nuts. US, the gearing and the Fletchers are 1.4, so factor that one in.
Yeah, so do we think at tier 8 and tier 10 that these ships are going to change the dynamic any, or is it going to be a fad? We see them pop up for the initial release and then they just kind of disappear.
Well, I mean, are you talking about for ranked play or for like randoms?
No, just in general, just randoms.
In general, I don't think they'll change much. Like you've mentioned, most players are probably going to find that if they're playing solo or whatever, smoke is too valuable to give up for radar. That and you combine it with like the squishiness of the ship, and it's just like it's just, if anything, it'll buff U.S. cruisers as a result, because now U.S. cruisers with our AP, we're gonna have something to really shoot at and farm a ton of damage off of. Not to mention for U.S. cruisers, like we don't have to give up smoke to take radar.
Well, that's because you didn't have smoke to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not really the same equation there, but that's
point
funny.
being, U.S. cruisers are going to bring radar because they don't have to make that painful trade-off.
All right, you heard it here, folks. Spectre said U.S. cruisers are coming back, which I don't think is going to happen
I don't think so
at all.
either. I'm definitely going to go with probably not on that.
I mean, the Des Moines is a good ship, and you'll see it, but that's kind of a player's really just got to like that ship to pull it out.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of those lines that you get to the tier 6, the Cleveland, which is pretty dang good still, and then you free XP your way to the Des Moines and just skip over the things in the middle. We won't talk about those ships.
Well, let's segue for a second. We'll come back to the British cruisers for a second, since you got us on it. Is that in 5.13 they buffed and changed the layout of the New Orleans. Pretty significant changes there. But I haven't wanted to touch it since my trauma days early on. Have either of you guys played with it or looked at it to see kind of if it really made a true difference for the New Orleans?
I'm only up to the Pensacola on U.S. cruisers, and I stopped there for obvious reasons.
I haven't noticed a terribly great difference. I mean, the ship feels somewhat more survivable. But I mean, if you're in a cruiser and you're taking sustained battleship fire, you've done something wrong anyways. So I don't know. My U.S. cruiser playstyle is largely built similar to the Atlanta playstyle of stay out of sight and out of mind. That's why I find these British cruisers to be so fun, because you get smoke, which great. So I mean, I don't know. I haven't been shot at my New Orleans that much. But I was in a close quarters engagement with the Kutuzov the other day, and you enter that that weird moment where it's like I have nothing to gain from turning in towards him, because we were both coming around an island, and if I turned towards him, I was either A, gonna beach into the island, or B, I was gonna sail past the island, and his team was waiting behind him, so I didn't want to do that. So I turned out and it showed broadside instead. So Kutuzov got 2 salvos of AP off into my side, and normally I feel like before the patch that would have killed me, because Russian AP just incredibly overpowered at close distances. But instead, I mean, he took a huge chunk out of my life, out of my health pool, but I didn't die. I think it was like a 3k salvo followed by like a 2k salvo. So I guess based on that one singular anecdote, yes, the New Orleans is slightly more survivable. And if you just look at the armor layout, pre and post patch, it's pretty huge. The citadel size is much reduced.
Yeah, it looks like it's almost cut in half. Basically, they took it away from the guns, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're going to be taking this ship and taking battleship shells from now on out. It's a buff, but like you're still a cruiser. Nothing that has fundamentally not changed.
All right, so they made some changes to the Mogami's turret rotations as well. And so with all the changes, if you had to rack and stack tier 8 cruisers, and I'm going tier 8 just because I think the US server has finally moved to a position where tier 8 is kind of the sweet spot. It didn't used to be, but I think that's about right. If you had to rack and stack them, your cruisers from 1 to whatever.
Well, I would definitely put Otago at number 1, personally. And then I don't know, for tech tree ships, I would still say Mogami is probably still the best, followed by Hipper. And then maybe, what's the tier 8 for the Russians? I can't remember.
The Kutov or the Chapayev.
Oh, the Chappie is the tech tree one, right?
Yeah, you can say premium ships.
Oh, I don't know. I would probably put the Chappie, and then I'd probably put the New Orleans. I think the New Orleans utility is in the fact that it has radar, but so does Chappie. And I have no idea where Edinburgh is going to fit into that equation.
Huh. That's a very eclectic list that you chose order-wise. How about you, Spectre?
It's hard to say. What I will say, though, is despite these buffs, my relative judgment of these ships has not changed drastically. It's not like all of a sudden now the Mogami is top tier or like the New Orleans is acceptable and ranked now. But I mean, they're nice buffs. they're good to have, but fundamentally in terms of just tiering and power, I feel like they haven't really shifted that much.
So number 1 tier 8 cruiser, what is it?
Otago.
Really?
Nope.
Yeah,
I'm looking
I
at the
think so.
stats right now. It's not.
Well, stat wise versus what actually is, I don't know. We can argue about that.
Yeah, and like you and I have talked before in the past, stats don't tell the complete picture. They just tell a picture, and it's a matter of interpretation as to what that picture actually is.
I mean, my tier 8 cruiser list is basically also my what cruisers are acceptable in ranked list, and the Otago is at the very top of that. If you're going to bring a tier 8 cruiser into ranked, it better be an Otago or a Kutuzov, or maybe a Chapayev. But anything besides that, and I think you're handicapping yourself and your team.
So do you think the Edinburgh is going to be viable then? Because if you say Kutuzov, and I get the fire thing, but you've got radar.
No,
you've got radar.
No, because so first of all, if you bring Edinburgh and you bring radar, you're not bringing smoke.
Well, no.
And
What I'm saying, I bring it with the smoke. Let's talk smoke.
Okay.
No, that was the criteria.
Right.
Smoke, not radar.
I mean, you're still bringing an incredibly squishy cruiser, and you're talking about playing with players who aren't going to take 3 or 4 salvos just to bracket your speed and heading. So basically it boils down to the fact that the Edinburgh is just too squishy. It's just way too squishy, and if you can't coordinate the smokes with your destroyers, or just can't keep yourself in concealment the whole time, the moment you peek out, you're just going to get blown out of the water.
Well, that's true for all cruisers in ranked, right?
Well, and at that tier too, not just in ranked.
It's true for them, but the thing is, I just feel like, so with the Edinburgh, you do well against the cruisers, you do well against the GDs, but if you bring in a Otago, those two statements remain true, and at the end of the day, you can still lob HE at battleships. And I mean, in ranked battles, you're just not going to get too many opportunities where you're going to have a battleship broadside to you the whole time, especially if they know that you're going to be slinging AP into them and collecting 4,000 or 5,000 salvos off of it. They're going to either run away or they're going to angle, and sooner or later your damage is going to drop off considerably. Whereas with the Otago, you're setting fires, and your HE just applies really well.
So you just set me up there, because for a brief moment I was like, man, I wish I could go back into ranked and give it a try just to prove you wrong a little bit, to see if I can make it work. And then I caught myself, and why would I want to do that, right? Why would I want to go back into ranked? So you win.
Ugh.
You win.
There's that, and ultimately, it's which my ship ranking is all else being equal. So equal skill or whatever. But if you're particularly good at playing the Edinburgh, you can probably perform. But again, this is the same argument before. If you can perform in Edinburgh, you can probably perform just as well, if not better, than the Otago. It just boils down to squishiness and engagement envelope, and it's just the Otago basically sort of has the Edinburgh beat on both.
It's more squishy? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's less squishy.
Oh, because it's pretty squishy.
Yeah, they're pretty squishy. But here's the thing: an angled Otago will bounce 8-inch shells, whereas these British cruisers so far have shown absolutely no ability to deflect AP of calibers 8 inches or higher.
Yeah, that's true. They get wrecked if they get shot.
Not to mention, if you ever look at the ships, they have tons of superstructure, and then they're also relatively fat ships.
Yeah, it's like a giant Lego ship, right?
Yeah, they're really wide, and you look at how slim the Otago is. It's just sometimes you in a cruiser, you're making that turn trying to dodge those battleship shells, and you see the shells just fall. One falls immediately to the starboard of the ship, one falls immediately to the port of the ship, and it's just thank God. Well, and if you're in a British cruiser, those shells probably would have connected.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I think for me, just because I am super biased, still goes Prince Eugen. And then I think Kutuzov. I don't know. You got me saying Kutuzov. Kutuzov. And then I want to say Mogami because there's a part of me that likes the Mogami, but really the Atago. I think I still remember the time when the Atago didn't have a heal.
Yeah, that's probably a lot of it.
Yeah, and I think most of my games actually happened when it didn't have a heal. But I think when we'll see, I think the Edinburgh would be my number 3 at some point. We'll see, just because of the flavor.
I'm kind of interested to see how. So the Otago and the Edinburgh both have 10k torps when fully upgraded, and I'd be interested to see how that single fire plays out even in ranked. I would be curious to see how that all plays out, simply because of the fact that it seems like in ranked, a lot of the battles happen in that 10k range. That's part of the reason why the Bismarck is such a powerful ship in ranked, at least in my opinion, is you've got those secondaries working in that range all the time. And to have the maps that are being played there's a couple of them where there's enough island cover there. It could be interesting to see what those single launch torpedoes are capable of. Granted, you only have 3 of them, on each side. So I don't know.
Well, does the Edinburgh only have 2 launchers on each side? I can't remember.
Yeah, it only has one launcher on each side. Unless I'm misreading this right. It says 2x3.
Yeah. 2 triple launchers.
1 on each side.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but I don't know. I'd be... Nope, see, you almost did it to me again. You almost got me again. I'm not doing it. Not doing it. Maybe in team battles, whenever that's going to come out.
Maybe.
Well, if ever.
So speaking of... Let's get back onto British cruisers. Did any of you watch the 360 video?
I've not checked that out.
It's pretty interesting, and the way they did it is pretty interesting. But there is somebody in there before. Were you guys ever familiar with the Challenger, who was in there with the Chieftain?
Nope.
No.
Yeah, me neither. I was like, that's curious. Let's
Who's this guy?
More. Yeah, exactly. Who's this guy before? Because after we had the Chieftain on, I went back and I watched a whole load of their videos to kind of check it out. They did one on like the San Francisco Bay batteries and all sorts of stuff like that, which are pretty interesting actually. But I didn't see anything with him in it, so now I've derailed us, and pretty soon we'll be talking about Steven Seagal again. But
yeah, we're headed toward that direction right now.
I'll bring us back on track. We'll get back on track. So let's see. What else about British cruisers that we didn't really cover? I think we really kind of hit all the stuff that sets them aside, other than, are we betting on the first nerf or buff or change for British cruisers? If you had to make one change to that line as it is right now, what would it be?
I honestly think they're actually in a fairly good place right now, despite some reports coming out saying that Wargaming hasn't quite tested these ships too much. And the reason why I say that is simply the ship has very clearly defined strengths and weaknesses. Right? Like they don't have HE, they're incredibly squishy. But you've got smoke, you've got heal, and you can fire your torpedoes one at a time. And in the right hands, in the right situation, these ships are just incredible. Borderline overpowered. In fact, the single launch torpedoes thing is just actually very game changing. I mean, obviously at range, you run the risk of missing most of your torpedo shots, but if you get in close to someone, whereas with the spread launchers before, if the enemy ship was sort of like actively angling against you, against like a torpedo spread, you can maybe land 1, maybe 2 torpedoes onto them. With the single launch, you can very well land every single one into them. And that is just huge, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't see any significant changes coming to them. I think adding HE, like so many people want to do, I think is just going to make them too ridiculous. Now, I personally am not I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think, an Atlanta clone or Flint clone at tier 10 might help out some of the lethargic battleship players who want to sit in the back and camp. But by the same token, I don't think that should be the high tier gameplay either. So I don't see any major changes coming from Wargaming with regards to the Royal Navy cruisers, at least not for at least another month or two, simply because of the fact that we just don't know how they're going to play compared to the other ships nearly as well as we will in the future.
I will say though, if they were to make a change, one really nice change I would like to see would be a slight buff to their battle armor.
Yeah, I like that.
That's like it. Because right
that
now
would not
it doesn't
be bad.
Angling almost doesn't matter, right? Like it's like right now for most ship, angling is two parts. One is it just reduces your target profile, and number two, it increases your armor. But with the British cruisers, it's you just reduce your profile. But with how fat the ships are, like it almost like it's less effective. And add on to the fact that your armor doesn't stop anything, that's just incredibly devastating. So maybe a slight buff to that would be nice. But other than that, I think the ships are actually pretty good where they are. Of course, this is strictly applying to tiers 6 and 7. I haven't played the other ships, so who knows?
Yeah,
Up to tier 5, I would agree with you.
133k in a Leander, and I'm like, I don't know if that's any indicator of the later ship gameplay. Then I can't imagine that they stay how they are forever. That and the other thing I was looking at is no defensive fire. While it looks like it's a kind of a nerfed ability, looking at some of the higher tier cruisers and the dual purpose guns they have, I don't think it's gonna matter, honestly.
At tiers 9 and 10, yeah, there are AA complements. The tier 10, I know for sure at least, has AA numbers almost on par, if not exceeding the Des Moines.
Well, the range on them looks like it's gonna be super far for at least the first tier bubble, right?
The long range bubble reaches further than the Des Moines bubble, which just further feeds into my long-standing complaint with Wargaming adding ever more amounts of AA to the new ships that they constantly release.
Carrier what?
Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I tend to agree,
again,
though. I think
that complaint stems not from just me playing carriers, but also from the fact that it erodes the uniqueness of the U.S. line, which frankly is pretty weak as it is with how few carriers there are floating around these days. But yeah.
No, I definitely agree with you, Spectre, and nowhere is that more prevalent than in the cruiser line, where you have nothing else really to gain from going down that line. Your utility to the team outside of having radar seems pretty limited, and I don't really think that the trade-off for more AA justifies their current play style, especially since carriers are non-existent beyond tier 8, it seems like.
Who wants to play a Baltimore? Who goes out of their way to say, yeah, I'm going to play the Baltimore today for fun?
I do, whenever I feel like hating myself.
As a reminder.
Just some punishment.
I mean, to be fair, my Baltimore games basically are very binary. It's either I suck in them, where I just instantly die, or I live all game and I rack up a ton of damage, and I always ask myself why I hate this ship so much. But yeah. In general, U.S. U.S. cruisers, our thing is supposed to be AA. But if every other cruiser's AA is really good, why are we playing U.S. cruisers? I mean, for God's sake, at tier 8, the New Orleans isn't even top of its class in AA. I think that honor actually goes to either the Kutuzov or I think either the Hipper or Eugen. So
it's probably Hipper.
Yeah, I just don't understand what if our unique thing for U.S. cruisers is supposed to be AA, but in fact, in terms of if you crunch numbers, it's not. Then what are we getting in exchange for having these horrible guns?
You should go back and play the U.S. battleship line, because all from tier 3 all the way to 7, their stats are showing that they're actually doing worse than the Germans are. And actually at tier 5, the New York is the lowest of them all in average plane kills. But caveat emptor there being that could be just the fact that people have learned to avoid them. So it's hard to tell, but just from my subjective experience there too, it seems like the German battleships are a little bit more capable with anti-aircraft at the low tiers than the U.S. ones are. And a large part of that is because almost all of the U.S. battleships are missing parts of their anti-aircraft complement that they had in World War II. Maybe not the tier 8, 9, and 10, but certainly the 3 through 7 are missing some. New York should look like the Texas, and the Texas I think was even more ridiculous than it is in game.
Well, now you've got me baited again. So we'll shift. I think we've covered all the stuff on cruisers. Let's get into the battleship stuff, because that's kind of your preference, I think, Whiskey. And you made it. Well, all right, maybe not your preference, but in recent history and my short-term memory, we talked about it more recently than other things.
True.
Short of the destroyer AP shenanigans.
Which is amazing, by the way, for people who are completely unexpecting it. It is amazing to catch ships broadside with AP and U.S. destroyers.
But you said something there, which we've talked about before, is the German battleships doing better at shooting down planes than U.S. battleships. And so I don't know if you've gone back and looked at it since the last time we talked. I don't think that is necessarily indicative of AA capability so much as carrier players' targeting preference.
Well,
that's what I would chalk it up to.
I mean, it could be. I look at it. I would hope that over a number of battles that you look at least in the video that I did with the statistics, we're talking about several, in some cases, 50,000 battles across all 4 servers. And I would hope that over the course of those, that the statistical averages would kind of mitigate the avoidance issue a little bit. But just in subjective feel, even, I honestly feel like the U.S. battleships don't do nearly as well against aircraft as the German battleships did at the same tier. And I'd have to go back through and look at my videos from the U.S. battleships and go back and play them even and pray that there's a carrier in the match, which is rare anyway, just to kind of get an idea. But like I said, my subjective opinion of that anyway, even ignoring the stats, is that it really felt like Gneisenau, especially compared to Colorado, holy cow, those dual purpose guns for AA do a lot of damage, and it keeps them far enough away that it feels that way, that it's shooting down more aircraft. And maybe it is just the fact that people are actually targeting German battleships. I don't know.
Well, Spectre, so if you're in a, I don't know, do you even have, when was the last time you played a tier 5 carrier, just out of curiosity?
Wow.
Do you own one? Do you still own one right now?
I do not own a tier 7 carrier. I don't own any carrier below tier 7.
Well, does tier 7 work for your argument, Whiskey? Can we talk tier 7s? All right, so in a tier 7 carrier, all things being equal, you've got a what do we got? A Nagato, a Gneisenau, and a Colorado.
Colorado, yep.
Who are you going to target first?
Nagato.
Huh, interesting.
That's
and then second?
What I would choose.
Second, I would probably have to go with the Gneisenau, just because I'm still biased towards non-US battleships. But the Gneisenau is like dual purpose armament. When I played the Gneisenau, was really formidable. It's just, I mean, once you get within like the range of the Bofors on the US battleships, like that's when they start really tearing into you.
But you're only in that range of those Bofors for a very short period of time. You know, that's the problem with it. Whereas those long range dual purpose guns, they hit harder it seems like they hit harder for a lot longer than those Bofors do. Because even on the North Carolina and full AA spec, your Bofors kick in at 5K. I don't know. Like I said, it's interesting because you go and you look at those stats, and while stats aren't perfect and it's a matter of opinion, the Gneisenau, the average across all 4 servers, is 3 times as many aircraft shot down as either the Colorado or Nagato. And that's the part that's interesting, is because in previous, Nagato would have been the preferred target over those two, whereas now, not so much. So it's interesting that those two ships would be that close to each other because they're within not even an eighth of each other in terms of split. In number of aircraft shot down, and then to have the Gneisenau that far ahead.
I mean, for a carrier player, like my calculation is both ships AA hit like really hard, right? Like you're going to lose planes attacking either the Gneisenau or the Colorado. Like that's just like a given. And you're probably going to bleed a lot of planes. But the thing is with the Gneisenau is it's a lot longer than the Colorado. It's very easy to sink torpedoes in that ship. Whereas the Colorado, because it's so short, if he just turns slightly, like half your torpedoes are going to miss. So, I mean, again, like I still prefer the Gneisenau now, just because I'm gonna lose planes. I'm gonna lose planes if I attack the Gneisenau or the Colorado, but I'm gonna get more damage out of hitting the Gneisenau than I do the Colorado.
Well, and the U.S. standard actually turns way tighter too, so that's the other trade-off to that. It's 640 to 830 is the difference in turning circle. Actually, nope, it doesn't change any.
I'm gonna have to start like an unofficial poll and just start talking to carrier players I know and see what it is they target first and why they choose that, and see if we can kind of figure this one out, because you kind of got me curious about why that really is. Because I look at like the tier 8, right? So you go up to the Bismarck or the Tirpitz, and what's your take on planes shot down there?
So at tier 8, 9, and 10, the U.S. takes over in terms of aircraft kills, but it's not a huge lead. So at the North Carolina, the average across all 4 servers is 3.15 aircraft. The Bismarck is 2.73, and then Amagi is 1.9. So not a huge difference, about a half an aircraft, it seems like. But it's, the NC is definitely higher up there. The NC also has a lot more anti-aircraft than the Colorado does, and it's a lot closer to its actual historical outfit too in terms of anti-aircraft.
Well, it wasn't always that way either, though. So were you looking at like a 2-week overall total?
That's 2 weeks. So that's 2 weeks. That's okay. From the 7th of October to the 21st of October.
Yeah, and I guess the other factor in there that we haven't really looked at is, how many carrier players and what ship mix, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to get down to that. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to put that on the list. I'll be curious. Like,
I'm sure Wargaming can, but they're just not going to give us access.
Yeah, and it's really hard to control those variables too, because there's also, RNG factors into how aircraft are shot down. So, there's always that RNG factor too. We could run a dozen tests with each ship using a control environment, like in the training rooms or something, and we'd probably not get a consistent result across the board.
Yeah, I don't really want to run 30 plus tests to get some sort of statistical relevance, but
it'd be kind of fun to do, though, if I could find somebody crazy enough to do it.
Spectre volunteered. I heard him. He just PM'd me.
Rotten hell.
You did. I got it. I'll print screen it for you.
God.
The other big change recently was, didn't they make a change to the Montana?
Yes, they increased the deck armor by about 10 millimeters.
And only up to
38, right?
Yes.
Give me 1 second. I can look here.
So I guess that was such a really weird change for me, is that, of all the changes, what the heck? Like, I haven't played my Montana since then, but really.
Ooh, pick on me. I know the reasons why.
Spectre. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, please.
So this was brought up on the forums. In fact, this spawned one of many threads asking for buffs to U.S. battleships, whether right, wrong, indifferent that opinion may be. But it was brought to the attention of Wargaming that the actual deck armor thickness, it was wrong that they were using. And the source that Wargaming was using listed on the same page 2 different values. One was in the tables, and then one was in the diagram for the actual armor profile. And they used the one that was in the tables, if I remember correctly, and it was that previous, I think it was like 29 millimeters or 28 millimeters. What they went back and did then is they went back and changed it to the value that actually historians agree with and what the actual design would have actually had. Because if you remember correctly, Montana, unlike many of the other paper ships in the game, her design was finalized. Her purchase procurement was actually pretty dang close to being signed off when they decided, no, we're going to go with more carriers instead of battleships. So her design was finalized and done. And so all those details had been laid out and hammered down and were finalized. All they had to do is basically build the ship. And so all of these other documents all agreed that it should be 38 millimeters for the top deck. And I forget what the actual armored deck should be. And so Wargaming went then and changed it. And the upshot to that is 29 millimeters wasn't enough to auto bounce Yamato shells at range. Whereas now with the 38 millimeters, there's enough deck armor there that we can actually bounce a Yamato shell. Finally, at least a midship anyway.
You mean at range with plunging fire?
Yeah. So long as those Yamato shells don't fall, I think it's 66 degrees or steeper. I forget. 24 degrees or shallower, 66 degrees or steeper.
So what range does that put you at in game?
Oh,
Yeah,
pretty far.
come on.
Hang on, let me go look. I'll pull it up on NavWebs.
Yeah, but that's a pretty interesting change, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure that's going to make me want to play the Montana more, but I don't know. How about you,
No.
Spectre? Uh-oh. Did
Apparently
we lose you?
Spectre's asleep.
He's like, Montana, I'm not listening anymore.
Okay. Looks like 25 kilometers and in is where it will bounce. So that's actually pretty much the entire engagement range of Yamato in game. I forget what Yamato is. It's like 26.
But that's the deck midship.
Correct. So that's not at the fore end or any of that.
Yeah, so the chances of hitting that versus white damage you'd get on superstructure and all that kind of stuff seems like it would be fairly small.
Yeah, and I think stand a better chance of penetrating that upper belt because you're going to hit it at a more favorable angle than you would the deck anyway.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah, the angle of fall at 25 kilometers is 23 degrees. So it's going to be just over 25 kilometers where it will bounce or stop bouncing and start penning the deck itself.
So we'll call this a reconciliation versus a buff or a change.
It's a slight buff in survivability, but it's not a huge change. It doesn't make the Montana play any significantly different. It's still very, in my opinion, weak compared to the other tier 10s, or at least the Yamato. Yep, there goes Spectre.
Oh, it's probably his internet.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. You at the Kurfürst yet? You're not at the Kurfürst yet.
Nope, I'm still working on Friedrich der Gross and not enjoying it.
Well, I mean, you've at least seen the Kurfürst in battle, and for me,
Oh yeah.
it's a total game changer when it comes to Yamatos because I'll play a Kurfürst over Yamato all day long.
Yeah, and it's one of the few ships that actually has a defense against the Yamato's 18-inch shells from that bow on Maeda. So you can actually close the distance with the Yamato without getting destroyed.
Well,
and that plays to your advantages, obviously.
That's true, but I also noticed that at least with that recent change where they narrowed the dispersion under a certain range, especially for German battleships. I think it's like 5K. I've noticed in brawling and closing the distance with Yamato, way more citadels. I mean, in close, I'll average between, I don't know, 3 and 5 citadels salvo against Yamato, which previously in like a Montana or something you felt like was unheard of.
Well, it was almost impossible. That front bow armor on the Yamato being 32 millimeters means you can't overmatch it. So the only way that you can actually penetrate it is, again, when you hit that plate closer to straight on. And it worked fine with a little bit of angle because of the way that the citadel on the Yamato is laid out. But at the end of the day, it's too difficult to penetrate the Yamato with those 16-inch guns in spite of the real world values of it.
And the other thing with the Yamato is it's got great secondaries, except half of them fire AP. And
and that hurts.
Yeah, and when you're in a secondary fight against a Kurfürst, the HE on the Kurfürst is going to beat the Yamato's AP all day long.
Oh, guaranteed. Simply, even if it's only 5%, which is I think all that the fire percent chance is, that's still better than half of your secondary shooting AP. And I really think that that's a pretty good balanced choice on Wargaming's part. Oh, it's 8 and 5%. So the 150s have an 8% chance of starting a fire, and that's without flags.
That and the angle is better on the secondaries on the Kurfürst. You don't, in order to get all of them in the fight, you don't have to over angle and put yourself at risk like you would in a Yamato if you wanted all of your secondaries in the fight.
Correct, especially with that rear 6-inch gun turret on the Yamato. You kind of have to give yourself way too much of a broadside profile to get that last gun into play, whereas you don't have that problem with any of the German battleships.
Yeah,
Well, realistically, I don't think any Yamato player angles your ship based on what their secondaries can hit.
Oh yeah, I was just curious to that. No,
yeah, but fundamentally, you're right. The Curve First can bring more secondaries to bear at good angles than the Yamato can.
Yeah, and so for me, I really enjoy the fact that the Curve First has kind of changed the dynamic of Tier 10 battleship play.
Well, all of them have.
More so than anything else.
I mean, the German battleships have changed battleship meta like across all tiers, right? I mean, we were stuck on 2 battleship lines for as long as the game's been out. We now finally have a third choice.
And that third choice is very, very capable in the type of fast-paced gameplay that is really necessary to really cause games to move forward. Whereas at the high tiers especially, it was like, oh my goodness, another bow-on fight between a North Carolina and a Amagi. Woo!
Yep.
Well, so I kind of curious. We've seen a very big cruiser variance in flavors. Now we've started to see a huge variance in battleship flavor. What is the British battle? What's the next battleship flavor, right? And we didn't even
The running joke is that the British battleships are going to have HE only.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
That would be hilarious and
that would be a terrible idea.
But or radar, right? I mean, I'm thinking radar.
Yeah, but I would think that there's some pretty good historical basis to give them radar, but I think really the nation that benefited the most from that was probably the U.S. Navy, which, long story short, obviously, apparently I'm biased for. I've been called a fanboy, and I've maybe.
Who calls you a fanboy? Because I wanna call you a fanboy too. I'm just kidding.
It was on my YouTube channel. Somebody had. I can't remember if it was a comment or a private message. I'd have to go back and look through. But yeah, I got called a USN fanboy. And I'm like, well, that's probably because, for one, I'm, American. So we tend to favor our home country and be patriotic and all that. But more or less, I look at it from the history standpoint. And that's the reason why I went down the U.S. battleship tree first, is because I can actually look at the history of those ships. Going through and looking at the history of a Yamato, like, yeah, there's history there, but it's not, you don't get the fine details that kind of get the engineer in me kind of going crazy. So it's not as interesting.
Just because of access to information. Well, I'm kind of curious. Just let's take it back to the episode we had the Chieftain on, and I don't know if you heard that one, but
oh yeah, I think I told you this when I'm at work. All I do is listen to your guys' podcast on repeat.
Oh man, we need to get you something else to listen to.
That's flattering.
I'm just joking. I don't always listen to it, but I've listened through a bunch of your guys' episodes multiple times. I feel bad that that's all you have. Yeah,
we got to be more interesting. But the Chieftain, actually, when we started talking about the Montana, and I think Spectre and him started to get pretty heated. Basically, just said shoot other ships, right? I think is what we took away from that.
Yeah.
Yep, I would agree. I think that mentality sidesteps the actual problem, and I don't know. I think
sidesteps. You're in a completely different world from the problem if that's your solution.
Right. I mean, when you look at it fundamentally, starting with the Mark 8 super heavy shell, and it's not the only shell in the game that kind of gets the screw, but any of the super heavy shells, really, it's like these shells perform like calibers well above them. Frequently you'll hear people say, well, the Mark 8 had penetration values that were like 95% of the 18-inch guns on a Yamato. And there's an element of truth to that. And at ranges, it actually exceeded the penetration capabilities because the angle of fall was steeper. But that's not something that is viable in this game. As we pointed out with the Yamato shells, to get deck plunging fire, you have to be beyond 25 kilometers on some ships. The Mark 8 doesn't gain anything there. But when you're bow onto something and that a Mark 8 can penetrate 3 inches of armor with a 14-degree angle of fall, and here you're you can't pen through 28 millimeters of armor or 32 millimeters of armor. It's like, really? That seems a little frustrating, especially when the reverse is true, where they can shoot through your bow. But all that aside, I heard that episode and I was a little upset by the fact that he sidestepped it or completely ignored it.
For me, I think it's not a matter of, we don't have to necessarily go down the straight historical thing, because I mean, we can all agree the Yamato was an awesome ship, right?
Oh, I would agree.
I think in game though, the issue is the feel, right? I mean, we do all sorts of things, like we'll change turret angles because it just feels a little bit better. I think the issue is that you don't necessarily have to be citadeling a Yamato through the nose or anything like that, but you should feel like you can at least injure it, right?
Yeah, and right now that's simply not possible. And it is possible. You have to catch them, nearly broadside. And I think that's part of the frustration a lot of high-tier U.S. battleship players have when facing off against the Yamato is the only reliable way to do damage is to switch to HE or shoot at other ships. And that's really not a viable long-term gameplay strategy, at least in my opinion. Yes, the Yamato is a great ship, but the fascinating part is, and yes, I'm going to bring a U.S. battleship back into this, you look at the Montana's armor scheme, and even ignoring the issue of STS steel, whether or not it's armor, whether or not it actually matters, the armor values are pretty much identical. The only difference is in the manner in which it's laid out. And the Yamato obviously has the more favorable pseudo turtleback armor scheme versus the standard all or nothing of the Montana. But the durability differences between the two is pretty different. I mean, the Montana just feels soft and squishy compared to Yamato when you play them.
Yeah, I think we'll still be talking about this issue on and off well into next year.
Oh yeah, I doubt it'll go away until Wargaming actually gives a substantial buff to U.S. battleships, which I just don't see happening. They've already said that they're performing fine, and then looking at the stats, I question what stats they're looking at, but maybe they've got a super secret squirrel set of stats that I don't have access to because I'm using Warships today, and they're using their own data collection.
Yeah, they really do, and it's one of those that we'd have to ask a very specific oriented question to try and to flush that one out, but
and I think it openly stated that they won't say anyway, simply because it's all covered under NDA and it's super secret squirrel. It's their business model, and I don't blame them for that. It'd just be nice to have just a little bit more clarity on exactly the reasons why they feel U.S. battleships are performing fine when the player base feels slightly different.
I mean, this debate's been raging since the game hit like closed beta or something. I mean, at this point, really, like, it's almost a waste of time and breath to continue arguing, because it's quite clear Wargaming has taken their stance, and it's just very obvious at this point that they are okay with having one tier 10 battleship completely dumpster another one. And I personally, I'm now of the opinion that any moment spent typing up or otherwise just trying to complain about this is a moment wasted that you could be grinding up a real tier 10 battleship.
like the Kerfers,
like the Kerfers or the Yamato. Like, yeah, at this point, like, if you can't accept the fact that the Montana gets completely dumpstered by the Yamato or the Kerfers now, like, this game is just clearly just you, or battleships are just not for you. You just need to move on.
Yeah,
like,
so
Wargaming is not going to budge on this.
Let's bring it back. What's the niche for British battleships? Yeah, it's a good one, huh? Tough.
I'm gonna probably step on my own. Anyway, if you look at the way Warspite is set up and the kind of the feel for that, it sounds like their big thing is going to be repair, and I'm okay with that. I think that's a pretty useful national flavor as opposed to the LOL AA with no carriers. So maybe that's what they'll get. I honestly don't know. I'm trying to think of what else they could have. I mean, like I said, radar, I really think even though we got our initial radar set up from the British, I think radar really was more of a big deal for the US than it was for the British. We relied on it almost exclusively in our high tier battleships. North Carolina, even the West Virginia, which is a Colorado class battleship, her claim to fame is, I think it was Battle of Suragawa Strait, one of the last battleship on battleship engagements of World War II. Out of her first 6 salvos, she landed shots in 5 of them using radar fire control. So I think radar is probably not what they'll get, especially since hydro is ridiculously overpowered on the German battleships to begin with.
Well, so you think just a bigger heel than the average battleship?
Well, the quicker damage repair party for one, and then the ability to repair more Citadel damage, I think is where they'll go with that. If I had to take a guess.
How about you, Spectre?
I think probably. I think they'll carry over the damage control party cooldown from Warspite, but I don't think they'll get the Citadel repair thing from Warspite. I think a developer specifically said that was added as a nod of respect towards the Warspite's history. As for other attributes, I mean, it depends. Like if you look at the battleships that the British built, they have a lot of battle cruisers mixed in. So we'll probably see, a lot of double turrets, 4x2s. I expect good accuracy, maybe slightly slower turret traverse, and maybe around US levels of armor.
Ooh, that does not sound fun at all.
But probably they also sacrifice some speed. But again, I'm not quite sure. There's probably gonna be a lot of paper ships up in the high tiers, so we'll have to wait and see. Man, but as long as their accuracy is good, I think they'll be perfectly fine.
What you just really described sounded awful to me.
I just really hope that Vanguard doesn't end up being the tier 10, whatever it is they end up choosing, because I think that will get just destroyed at tier 10.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's kind of wrap it up with a couple other changes that they had just recently, which was, and they're easy, right? The crates. And have any of you, since they added the profile viewing from port, actually looked at somebody's profile from port?
Oh yeah, they added that, didn't they?
Yeah, no, I haven't. It's easier for me to pull up Warships.today in the middle of a battle than it is for me to leave to port and then, oh wait, I can't go back into battle from that point.
Well, yeah, that's true. I did
I'm
it today just to see if it works, but
if I was legitimately interested in looking up stats, it would be in game, but I really don't find myself looking up other people's stats because I really just don't care.
All right. How about you, Spectre? You haven't tried it yet?
I haven't tried it yet, and yeah, I'd probably just look it up somewhere else. When I feel like whenever I'm looking at someone's stats, it's usually in the heat of battle when I'm in a flame war. I'm not interested in their stats after the fight. I need the stats, in the battle, so I can, remind them of how bad they are, or to see how good they are, and then that I need to shut up. But yeah, I haven't used it that much at all. You just heard, I just remind that they added that,
Yeah, as I was looking over notes, I was like, oh yeah, let me go check that out, see if it actually works. And it does, but I was like, I will probably never use this again. But right. The crates. What do you think about the crate thing?
Overall, it's a
step to what?
It's a step up, is what I meant to say.
Cut them off.
Yeah, if you're trying to grind credits, each credit crate is guaranteed at least 50k credits. That used to be the high end of the available daily missions you could get. So if you're looking to grind credits, that's a great way. Not to mention, it also gives flags and camo and stuff like that. Not to mention, you also have that random chance of getting a super container, which, some guy on Reddit posted a screenshot of him getting 100k free XP out of a super container.
Wow.
And yeah, ships. Someone opened cracked a Warspite the other day. It came with a 10-point captain. Overall, as far as rewards go, this is definitely a step up from their old daily mission system.
Well, so which crates have you been picking? Oh, sorry, Whiskey, you go on.
I was going to say, I definitely can agree with what Spectre is saying there. I think this is a great replacement for those daily missions, which were just awful.
Well, I know I've been spending every single chest I get because I don't really care. on the Lucky Chess one, and I've gotten like I don't know 20 consecutive 5 flags so far. What are you guys picking when you get your chest?
So until I know the numbers better, I'm sticking with the credits chest. You know, I took a few lucky the lucky chest just to see if I would luck out or not. But it's just like getting only 5 flags if you don't get a super container. Like I just feel like that's really poor returns. I mean, it's so easy to get carried away when you like go on Reddit or on the forums and people are like, "Oh my god, I opened a war spy," and other guys going, "Oh my god, I got 100k experience." But I'm pretty sure, like, if you ran the numbers, like the odds of those things happening is just really, really, really small. So I think I'm just gonna play it safe with the numbers and just take my 50k credits per crate. And
See?
if Wargaming ever decides to reward me with like a huge super crate, then so be it. But yeah,
Oh, so you're an investment strategy guy, and I'm a Las Vegas kind of guy.
yeah, it seems so.
I'm with you, Vermi, on this one. All I've done is hit try your luck, and I've not been lucky.
Yeah, I mean, with the old missions, I barely
Jeez.
looked at the daily mission anyway. So to me, anything I get out of this is just a bonus. So why
Yeah.
not?
Well,
Why
I
not?
mean, the daily missions aren't around anymore, and it's funny to me that you guys have been trying for the lucky crates and I've gotten nothing. I've been taking virtually nothing but credit crates, and I've already gotten 1 super container out of the credit crates.
Yeah, so that's pretty funny actually.
I'm gonna laugh if there's like a bug that the calculation is done wrong and it's actually a reduction in chance to get a super crate.
Yeah.
That would not surprise me in the least, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I would hope that would be something that would make it out of testing with a little bit better testing there, but who knows?
All right. So unless you guys got anything else you kind of want to touch on, I think we'll hit up the Halloween stuff that came out today next episode. Unless you guys really want to chat about Halloween stuff yet, but I'd rather punt.
The only thing I gotta say is it looks really cool, and you should definitely give it a shot.
Yep. In the few games I've played, it's a lot of fun, and I look forward to these kinds of things in the future. If Wargaming decides to make this a more common occurrence, it gives a little bit better focus for what the game was intended to be, which is a good teamwork-oriented game.
Yep. So there's 2 things I'm looking forward to that I'm really watching over the next, I don't know, 3-4 weeks, I think, sometime into November. Number 1 is they're getting close to the deadline for showing some sort of clan, something, anything in the game, and how the rank season stats, players, Flint distribution works out. And
Yeah,
so,
ranked. Yeah. God bless y'all for playing through ranked. I stopped at rank 10 because my blood pressure was getting way too high.
no, I got really lucky and I got out quick and early this time.
Yeah.
So don't hate, Spectre. Don't hate. Usually
my.
you get me, but this time I got you.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad that rank grind is over. The only thing that I'm kind of sad about, actually,
Don't you
is
do
that
it. Don't you do it.
is that they're taking away the premier flag when the rank season goes away, and I'm really enjoying the credit reduction in repairs. I want to be able to hold on to that flag until the season ends, or better yet, or not until the season ends, until the next season begins, or better yet, they just bake that bonus into the Jolly Roger flag.
Well, it goes back to this, right? Give me 1 cosmetic and 1 bonus flag that I can fly on my ship. Just do it. Do it right now. Give me 1 of each.
Would anybody choose anything but the Jolly Rogers if they had it? I mean, let's all face it. We're all pirates.
Know. I got a few that I might like because I'm a tool and have like the Scharnhorst flag and all that crap. So
Wallet warrior.
Well, there you go.
yeah, something like that. I don't know. It happens, right? Don't ask me about the MWO days and what I did there. So we'll talk about that later.
Oh, okay.
But
Now
all
I'm
right.
curious.
It involves
Yeah.
a lot of street corners and tricks.
Yeah, it might have.
Oh
But
my.
we'll talk about that off air because it is what it is. But all right, gents. Well, we'll catch you this weekend as we get back on a more regular schedule.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no,
Glad to
thanks.
have you on.
Thanks as always, man. All right. We'll talk to you later.